themselves, and then go down a quick list of questions. So that'll take us about the first 45 minutes of the session, and then we will open up the room if there are additional questions. So feel free to, either as we're going through and as you're thinking of questions, if you want to just drop them in the chat, feel free to, or as we're wrapping up near the end here, we're going to reserve the last 15 to 20 minutes for questions anyway. So feel free to come off mute if you'd like to directly ask them as well. Yeah, so with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Panelists, if you guys want to go ahead and go around and introduce yourselves.
Yeah, I can go first. Hi, I'm Harry. I am the current music director of Dhamakapella. I'm going to be a senior here at Case Western Reserve. I've spent my summer in Cleveland, and just a little bit about my musical experience. I've been the arranger for Dhamaka for the past, well, I guess this will be the third year. And I did a little bit in high school, and so yeah, I'm excited to talk about arranging in lower voice with everyone.
I can, oh, right click. I can go
You
next.
got it, you got it.
Sorry. Hey everyone, my name is Arjun. I'm going to be a junior at UT Austin this year. I'm currently the captain and music director for Hum. As far as my music background, I have a more contemporary or musical theater background, and I arranged for Hum last year. So thanks for having me. I'm excited to share and learn from the other panelists.
Okay, hi, my name is Ritvik. I've been the music director for Swarm for the past 3 years. I have more of like a Carnatic background, but like through being on Swarm and being surrounded by choir kids, I got to learn a lot more about this sort of thing. So, and through the arrangement process for the last 3 years as well, I got to learn a lot. So, excited to share anything that y'all might want to know or anything that I've learned.
Hi everyone, my name is Abhinav, and I've been the president of Swarm for the last 3 years, or I guess two, and then vice president before that. But a bit about my experience, I've seen the behind the scenes of Rithvik for the last 3 years, and his musical geniusness. And I've also been a bass, and last year I was the sole bass of Swarm. So hopefully. I don't know how much I can add, but hopefully I have some insight to give on top of the other three panelists. But yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Okay, so with that, we'll take it away with our first question. So that would be, how do you guys identify moments in your set where tenors and basses can drive the musical energy?
I think this is a really good question. I think a lot of times when you're arranging, there's a lot of oversight that can happen of your lower voices, but I think a lot of this question will have to do with when do you want your set to feel really full versus when do you want to let your lower voices shine? And I think that a lot of times when you want to let them shine, it's going to be at those moments where you don't need tons of support underneath everything, or one voice can kind of carry the bottom half of the set, but also letting your upper voices kind of take lead on that too. I think a lot of times we think of like upper voices as just being over the lower voices, but you can have a lot of interplay there. And so I think identifying those moments where you give your tenors and your basses moving lines and you have a lot of stuff for them specifically, where you can give them balance, with the soprano parts, where like, a lot of times you think of the sopranos as like moving fast or really high up there and you hear them really clear. Letting kind of some of the movement go and have some of those filler moments, not filler, but, supported moments is a really good way to, keep the energy moving.
Yeah, I fully agree. And one thing that I think about like tenors specifically, I always feel it's like such a comfortable range for a lot of tenors to like operate within. So it gives them a lot more freedom than I think a lot of other voice parts, in my opinion. I feel like they get like the more fluidity within like the way they're able to execute. And like Harry said, like I feel like with the movement that you get to imbue within that, you get so much texture from that. I feel like that really drives the energy too, because it can like slow down like the tone of it, but also increase the rapidness of these moving parts can like drive towards like a build up. And I think that also like when we're operating within like such a comfortable range for some of these singers, it gives you the opportunity to have these like high volume moments uh honestly, we take a lot of inspiration from y'all at Dhamaka with this, where we feel like a lot of times y'all are just able to like fill the room, and I feel like that's something I'm always yelling at my team about, like making sure like we fill the room, so like every like having those moments where you can like belt, but like as an ensemblist, I feel like that's super crucial, and I feel like that's something that we can really exemplify with our tenors and basses.
I can add a little bit. I think that the bases the bass line is a really good opportunity for arrangers to add like a secondary rhythm or like a secondary like pulse, which I feel like if you're going for a section that maybe you want to have more energy, that's like the first way that I sort of approach that is giving the basses a more interesting like rhythmic pattern rather than just whole notes or something more static. So I think the basses are the driver for like a higher energy moment overall.
All right. Feel free to jump in again and interrupt me if there are any final thoughts on that question. But if not, we'll move forward. So this next question is more about kind of the evolution of your arrangements. So how do your arrangements change after hearing them sung by your team?
I think I can answer that maybe. Since last year was my first year writing arrangements, I learned a lot about what works with an ensemble, and I think the biggest thing that changes in my arrangements after hearing them with the group is like the actual voice leading of the parts, especially like seeing how smooth each individual voice is. I know this session is focused on the lower voices, but I think in general. Um, just changing up the voice leading, making sure that every part has their own unique sort of melody or counter melody or whatever, is one of the big ways that I was like changing my arrangements throughout the year.
One thing that comes to mind for me uh is, oh shoot, I just lost it, bro. Oh my God. Okay, wait, never mind. Someone else go. My bad.
I can jump in quickly. I think that a lot of times it is very easy to get stuck in your ways as an arranger. And so when you hear something, like you're obviously writing it with the intention of having people sing it, but to write it and to sing it yourself is very different. And so a lot of what I do to, try to prevent as many changes as possible once I send something out to the team is to sing every part, like, arranging vertically versus arranging horizontally. Like you need to do both. But then once you give it to your singers, everyone has a different range. Everyone has a different part. And it's worth doing the effort of, twice, three times, four times. How much work is there willing to be put in before it makes sense to kind of change things? And you don't have to change big drastic sections, but like you were saying with the voice leading, if there's big jumps that you think would sound really cool as an arranger, and then you take it to your singers, and after a couple of times they can't do it, they're going to have to be doing it on top of choreo and breathing heavy, and you're at the end of the set. So there's a lot of elements that go into it that it's one of those, like, trust your singers a little bit. Like they will tell you, can push them, but they will tell you also when things need to be changed.
Yeah, for sure. I was actually going to say exactly that. Yeah, but one thing that I really like to learn about like the people on our team is like learning each individual person's like specific range, like for like a particular alto one or a particular tenor two, knowing how much, it's gonna sound bad, but like knowing how much I can push them to like challenge like the extremes of their range. I feel like that gives us as arrangers more, like, I guess, flexibility when we're creating. And a lot of times, like, we'll be writing something like you said, like we'll be writing something, it'll be like a proof of concept, and we'll figure out that like there'll be a jump or there'll be like a crazy dynamic shift, and realize that with choreo and everything, it's not gonna pan out the way that we think about it in our heads. So the more that we learn about like how specific mechanics in the arrangement affect us like vocally and affect us energy wise and affect what the execution is going to look like, that's why it's like an iterative process, and that's why we're able to go back to the drawing board even mid comp season when we realize, yeah, sure, like when we do rehearsals, it's we're finding that this is happening, so we need to go back and fix these minor things. But sometimes when you get on stage, it's a whole different beast, having to deal with like audio engineering and having to deal with mic issues, anything that might happen at comp, anything might happen via travel. Those are like a myriad of different things that you're never gonna be able to prepare for until the moment happens. So until that happens, then you can't adjust to what like it's going to be at comp. That makes sense. So uh, maintaining flexibility throughout the entire process up until the final performance that you do, that's integral to this process.
Awesome. Okay. So moving forward, we're going to focus again a little bit on the tenor side of things. What role should tenors play beyond simply filling harmony in an arrangement?
If I may, one thing that I've definitely observed from a lot of teams that like I've like come to like admire like the way that their set comes together, that I've really gotten ideas from. I really like the idea of echoing like the melody of the solo. And I feel like the tenor and like also like some of those middle voices are like perfect like placement for that sort of thing. Because like I said, these are very comfortable ranges for these singers. So when we're echoing and when we're harmonizing on top of like the lead vocal there, I feel like it gives more flexibility, like from a dynamic perspective. Like it doesn't feel like it's overpowering what the main melody is. So I feel like that's something that I'm trying to learn more about and trying to implement more from our arrangements. But I definitely think that that's something that's very helpful from them.
I definitely agree. I think the most like the most interesting way that I'm able to use tenors is like especially with like a treble solo, like octave doubling or like a call and response sort of thing. One of the things that I have been trying to improve in my arrangements is sort of giving like a slot for the soloist to fit into so that they're not clashing with any of the voice parts. So I feel like with the treble solo, it's really easy to have the tenor sing like a counter melody or like a call and response without it sort of overlapping with the range that the soloist is singing in.
Yeah, I agree. And I think people with a musical theater background especially know that like a tenor loves to be the soprano. And like, your voice parts love to kind of, sing the part that they think is the most fun. And so a lot of what I try to do is use that to your advantage. Like if your singers, like if your tenor twos really like the tenor one line, give them some stuff that goes up there. Let them shine in those moments. And the same thing with your tenors and your sopranos. Like if they really want to sing the melody, give them that doubling part. Or like you guys are saying, like have that call and response where you can give them that moment to shine because it will cut right through. It doesn't have to be the highest voice, but like Ritvik was saying earlier, like you can really kind of push your tenor ranges in a very fun way of like have them go over the altos. That will be a fun tone clash. Like there's a lot of stuff that you can do to let your tenors have that moment outside of just being harmony and let them really shine.
Awesome. Yeah, I really love those answers. So we're going to move from that to another bit of reflection. Um, so what separates an arrangement that looks good on paper from one that works well in rehearsal and on stage in performance?
This is a tricky one. I think this is definitely like where a lot of arrangers hit their kind of hardest point in the arrangement process. And I think a lot of the time it does just take practice and singing the parts out loud and really get like giving yourself that, you know, like a horizontal alignment rather than just vertical. Sing the parts out. Does it make sense? I think especially with syllables, like it's one of those where you can't really tell until you hear it. But I think what also separates an arrangement that looks good on paper versus in performance is being able to change it from paper to performance. You don't want to get too attached to every single thing that you write, or like you will never be able to change it in a way that like feels satisfactory. So
Fully agree. Yeah. One thing that we really like to do is change all of our music all the time throughout the comp season, like to ridiculous levels. But when we get our feedback from judges, we, I mean, it's sometimes it's not just about execution; it's about arrangement. And when we see what we're up against with other teams, we realize that sometimes we have to like adjust and be like, hey, we want to have like a big moment like this, or we want to have like an isolated moment with the soloist here. We want to have like a cool ensemble thing here, and like you want to have like a choreo showcase or beatbox showcase or a bass showcase, like looking at and being inspired by the things that are around you, and also hearing back from feedback from judges also plays into that a lot for sure. But another thing that I feel like is kind of underrated in this process, like song choice too. Because this is something that I really had to learn is that not only is it about sometimes I struggle with I just put two songs together. I'm like, I like these two songs. It's gonna be great, and then it's not. Like like it's sometimes it's just not that easy. Like it's about finding the moments in between these songs when they can really like create this cross section and feel like they're drawing from each other rather than it's like two lines from this song, then we'll do two lines from the song, then we'll do the chorus, and then like that's how I feel like I used to approach it. But like making sure that it's like interwoven in a way and like we also like to when we're developing these arrangements, that sometimes what we like to put out is like what emotion is going to be elicited, right? So not even just about like if the songs together have like the same emotion, but like is the what's the tonality of our execution going to like reflect upon the audience, right? Because sometimes we can put together like a chord and it'll sound like I guess it'll sound powerful, but then we'll sing it in person, it'll be sad or it'll be like lower energy than what we want. So about adjusting the execution to kind of take into account like emotion, whatever you want the audience to feel, whatever you want the audience to think that you're feeling too. But there's a lot of things that you have to take into account.
Yeah, one thing I'll add is that since I have more of like a a music theory background, I find myself getting stuck just like looking and listening to what the notation software is sounding like instead of, maybe taking inspiration from other teams. I think one thing I'm trying to learn is like figuring out what I want the arrangement to feel like and like sort of invoke, like Ritvik was saying. So like with Swaram, y'all do some really cool like sound design stuff which I feel like you can't really get just from following the rules of the horizontal, vertical arranging. Just making sure the chords fit. So maybe venturing out, listening to a bunch of different groups, figuring out like what you like and what you want to try to emulate instead of just getting stuck on the paper is my advice.
Yeah, for sure. And just to add one more thing onto that, it's not just about listening to like the performances, because one thing that also that made me learn so much more about like texturing from like from an arrangement standpoint is hearing what some of y'all sound like some of the other teams sound like when y'all publish your music online, which I mean, y'all's album Hum was like phenomenal. We listened to it. Dhamaka, we listened to all of y'all's like albums, EPs that y'all put out, and being able to see things on such like it allows me to listen to it on such like a granular level and see like how these things like are built up and all the things that I'm missing just because of like a competition setting, right? And seeing like the little things that like y'all put in there, like that allows us to approach our texture in a different way. So not only just like seeing these teams and drawing inspiration for them from a competition standpoint, but like really like studying to see how other arrangements and other arrangers kind of how they approach this like process for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, I know that was definitely one of the hardest questions to give a very concrete answer on. So you guys did a great job. Love just seeing just the mutual love across the teams here too. Super, super wholesome, heartwarming. So for the next question, we're going to move a little bit to bass and VP, because I know that obviously is a big part of our set. So what are examples of effective bass and VP interplay, or how to create it?
I think this is a really interesting one. It's a little challenging, but I think that the way a lot of times that I think about our VP is not necessarily assigning them a role into what is going to happen exactly through the set. Like if there is a moment that you listen to it and we need more power there from the VP, you can either change that or you can have your bass work in two ways. You can have them be that last lower voice at the end of your chord, or you can have them be really deep in their range and be more percussive and fill in those gaps where maybe VP needs to take a breath or we need a whoosh and they can't be like, hitting every single note in between. So like letting them kind of do what they need to do in each individual song and each individual part, not necessarily saying, well, our VP needs to be percussion all the time. They will be because of the nature of being VP, but when you have elements where you don't need your VP, let your bass pick up some of that because that is a really great way to have the upper voices, in that case being your baritone up, be in contrast with your bass, and then adding VP on top of that gives it a whole new texture.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. Yeah, I think bass can be so much more percussive than people like give it credit for sure. I think when we're thinking about like kind of like the genre of like arrangement that like a particular one's kind of eliciting, I feel like whenever we're tackling like, these different tempos, it kind of allows there to be different types of these interplays. Where if you're, I feel like for this year, one of our arrangements, it felt like a little bit more like we'd had like jazzier and groovier sections, I guess, and that's stuff that we never really like did before. It felt like a little bit experimental for us, but getting to do things where like the VP me like I get to like do like double time stuff and I get to like add more subdivisions, but then at the same time having more of like a moving bass type thing. In contrast with like more traditional beats or like halftime breakdowns or slow downs that kind of gear up for these ramp up type parts. And that's followed by like these block chords and like this steadiness and like these pedal tones by the bass, allowing them to like get like feed off the rhythm with each other. Like that is where like I find like the interplay there. And like I feel like you have more freedom to do this with when you have less bases. Like this is the first year we've had only one bass being Abhinav, and I kind of low key put him to work. And like I instead of like I feel like the last few years, last the year before that we had four bases and we had like pedal tones and block chords for the entirety of it. Didn't get to like experiment more with it. So like getting to like really have this added texture with it while I got to like do crazier things like with the rhythms of the VP, that like depending on it can really have an effect on what you're trying to put out, not just like emotion wise, but what the type of tone, what you want the audience to be feeling for sure.
Any other thoughts on bass and VP before I move on? Okay, perfect. Yeah, if not, no worries. And if you do, feel free to jump in later. Okay. So again, going back to a little bit of reflection, um, in your experience, what mistakes do arrangers commonly make when writing for lower voices?
I think maybe the one thing I would say is keeping it simple. Like, don't be afraid to spice up the bass and tenor parts. Like, don't limit it to just like the root and the fifth the whole way through the arrangement. Especially with the basses, even if you just want them to have the root note, like at least let them maybe like arpeggiate the chord or alternate between the fifth and the root, and then like have cool rhythms while they're doing it. Because it kind of drives the energy. Don't limit them to just singing, chords. One, because it's just less interesting, and two, the reason that people probably don't think about is that your singers will get bored, and that affects like the actual energy on stage, which is like a minor thing, but we do notice it.
I do have a lot of thoughts on this. Forgive me for I may yap. But it's hmm, how do I approach this? I feel like you said, I really think that like taking advantage of having like these moving parts is so crucial. Uh, what I think though is that I feel like when we're working like I see this a lot with bass and soprano. I consider those like the extreme voices while we have like alto and tenor, these middle voices. And with these extreme voices, I feel like they have like this proclivity to get like uh picked on the mic a little bit more and like tend to like be projected more, especially with the way that we EQ bass. And also like with the fact that like some things are just like for sopranos, like it's higher in their range, so they're louder on it, so they come out more. Um, with the bass, I feel like there should be a little bit more space between if you have a baritone section, the baritones and the bass, or if we have like tenor twos, our tenor twos and the bass. I like to have at least a fifth because sometimes I feel if there's between like if there's too small of a gap between the lowest note and the second lowest note, it can it will increase texture for sure, but it does cause for concern if like there's a lot of like clashing, even if it's not like a dissonant. Like for example, like if you're going to like the piano and you play like a fourth on but like on the lowest C and the lowest F, like because of like the texture that generated by those notes being lower as a whole, like you get this extra ringing and it feels like it's kind of muddling it a little bit. So I that's why I try to at least have our second lowest note at least like a fifth above our lowest, our bass notes, just so like it can feel we can feel like we have this more solid foundation for whatever chord is kind of being set up by these lower voices. Uh, yeah, and I definitely think that interplaying between having these long drawn out pedal tones and the rhythmic sections based on like vibes, honestly, like I feel like that's definitely something that it increases like the variety within like a arrangement itself.
Yeah, I think that you guys have really kind of hit the nail on the head. The one thing I'll add is when you have like, changes in phrases and stuff, don't be afraid to give your tenors and your bass difficult sections. I think a lot of time we give our hard stuff to our like sopranos or maybe even just the tenor ones and the bass. A lot of times, especially lower voices, have really wide ranges. And so you can give them, these big jumps or one section that sits lower in the range and the next section that sits higher in the range based on whatever you need that section to sound like. So I think that challenging your singers to an appropriate level is definitely something that you should do in your lower voices because it's something that they don't have maybe as much practice in, especially kind of like your middle tenor, your baritones, but they have a lot of the ability. So don't be afraid to give them that and to change what they're doing and, like Arjun said, like give them something that's going to make them interested and challenge them.
If I may add one more thing, absolutely. And one more thing that I really like to do with basses is give them a break. Like one thing that we always said, I remember when I was in orchestra, we always talk about like the double bass. Like we say like that's the anchor. And whenever we were explaining it to people, like we wanted to get in, we're like, it's so important because the second it's gone, you'll notice that it's gone. And there's nothing like removing the bass for a second just to increase the impact of the soloist or focus on the beatboxing, focus on like a harmony part, make something feel like it's more high stakes, like showcase like a belting part, but then bringing it back in, it kind of it allows it to resolve, but also let things hang in the air for a second because like you get to like subvert expectations of the audience. You get to have more of like I don't know, it makes it more unpredictable for sure, but it also adds like it feels like cinematic, I guess, because it feels like it's like a score, right? That you're taking something away and then bring it back, and then it's like an overture, right? I definitely like doing that for sure.
I'm gonna jump back in for 1 second because something that Ritvik said reminded me of just a general tip that helped me with my voicings, which is has to do with like the spacing. So someone once told me to sort of see if you can like mirror the overtone series when you're making your voicings. And what I mean by that is like with the overtones, like the first one's an octave, then it's a fifth, and basically the intervals get smaller. So what that means for voicings is that you want maybe the distance between your bass and your tenor, your bass and your baritone to be maybe an octave or a fifth. Whereas with all your treble voices, you want them to be a lot closer together, like thirds or seconds. So I think that's something that helped me. Maybe this is an answer to the previous question about what sounds better with the actual choir rather than on paper. So that's something that helped me with the voicings.
Yeah, and you guys are going in a really great direction for this next question. I think you're kind of touching on it. So we'll just
Hello?
kind of
Hello? 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 Hello?
okay. So we'll pivot to
Sorry
the
about
next
that, guys. I don't know
question.
who that was.
Yeah, I don't either. Um, okay, so kind of going back to what we were talking about, you guys were really touching on how you guys approach assigning parts of the chord to the bass line. So the next question is actually how do you approach writing the bass line first versus the harmony? If you guys kind of want to build on what you were talking about.
Yeah, I think that this is something that maybe is not like great advice, but I would say don't give yourselves too many rules with what your bass is going to do. Like, if it use your ear, do a lot of listening. A lot of advice that I give is like when you can pick out of like your own arrangement, something that you don't like, it is so much better to like then be able to write something you do like. But at the same time, don't be so set in your own ways. I think that a lot of times I like to write a bass line first. That kind of gives me an idea of where do I want to go with this because that's going to be the support. Like Rizik was saying, like it's your anchor. You really want that support at the bottom, but it can be your bass line. It can be your harmony. Whatever you need it to be is sort of that's the beauty of arranging. Like you can do kind of whatever you want. So that is sort of my 2 cents on whether or not like you want your bass to be bass versus harmony. It's both, and it can be both.
This is sort of more like a arrangement thing, but because I watch like a lot of these comps, I watch a lot of like ICCA stuff, and something that I kind of come to realize is that it is like okay to do like if you're doing an arrangement of a piece, like to do the chords of the song. And I think a lot of times for especially for bass, we kind of just give them like the do of the scale, like the tonic of the scales sometimes, and not like play around more with it, or like not operate within like that four chord structure, 4 or 8 chords, right? So I feel like that's kind of what I like to do first is like when maybe we're making like this skeleton. I think about what chord is going to go where, and I just as a placeholder, I just put like whatever the bass note is, and then I build the harmonies on top of that. And as Arjun said, like I really like the idea of like the exponentially smaller like harmonies. That's exactly what we do. I mean, our sopranos are super crunchy, but then like our like bass and tenor and baritone and all that is like super far from each other for sure. And after we have like the higher harmonies done, and we insert like our moving parts, our textures, our like our echoing parts, if we have ad libs part like that, and then we kind of see how like the solo kind of interweaves with like the harmony. Then we look at the bass line. Then I'm thinking about the VP part in my head. I'm like, how can these two work in tandem with each other to like really elicit the mood of this? Like, how do we make this play with this? And sometimes it is that pedal tone that remains there that stays because that's what it's commanded by like the tone at that particular passage. But later on, we're having like something that needs to like walk up or walk down, and then that will like direct the harmonies above it as well. So like identifying where in the piece like what you want to listen at that type at that point in time, that allows you to like think about what you want the bass to be doing there.
I agree. I'm personally a fan of writing bass lines first and then filling in the harmonies. My personal philosophy is that if your arrangement doesn't sound good with just the melody, bass line, and VP, then you need to fix the bass line or the VP or something. But that's my personal philosophy, and then I go in and fill in all the harmony parts, add counterpoint, add whatever I can to spice it up from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I just to add one more thing onto that, this kind of like the other question with like the VP bass interplay. There are also really cool things that you can do. I mean, I hear this in like like music with instruments and stuff. Like there are really cool things you can do with just having a soloist bass and beatboxer. I mean, like that is technically the anchor about it, like the anchor of the whole thing. Like everything else is kind of just everything else can exist with and without it. But having those parts that really isolates like the rhythm that's being established and isolates the solo that allows them to go off slay and like and then bringing them back in that like has a differentiating factor within itself. And like this is another thing that like in our the like the philosophy that I like to tell like our other ranges and all everything like that, when we're having a repeated part, it's always good to change something the second time around. Like if like the lyrics are repeated, or if the chord repeats, or like if we're coming back to like verse 2 of a song, do something different that differentiates it. So if it's lower energy the first time, or like you want to change up the beat or something like that, you want to increase the moving parts, like increase like the echoing in the background, do something different because otherwise it'll be boring. Like challenge the audience too, like challenge them to be like, oh, I wasn't thinking that they're going to do the same thing there, but they did something different entirely. So like not only challenge yourself and your rangers and your team, but challenge their expectations too, like subvert them.
Awesome. Okay, so we'll step a little bit away from writing and arranging and shift over to performance a little bit. As you guys are very well aware, mic technique is a really big part of how things come across on stage. Same thing with applying bass octavization. So the question is, when performing on stage, how do you use mic technique and bass octavization and have them work together to achieve a full, impactful bass sound?
This is actually it's a good question that I like to think about in tandem with VP because a lot of times you get onto the stage and you are out in the audience or you're hearing it in the monitors and you hear VP and bass and maybe the octavization underneath it. A lot of times I think that bass octavization should be something that you use as just that one little thing on top. You don't need it as integral parts of your set. I think when you have your bass in a lower part of their range, that's a really great time to use octavization because it will give it that little extra impact. But when you want your bass to sit right with your other voices, like if they're acting a little bit more as, like what we were saying, like with harmony rather than as like a strict rhythmic bass line, you want them to be able to fit right in. And sometimes octavization then sits in a weird VP range, depending on who you have VPing and like just what their tone of voice is. You don't want those things to clash, especially because it's just on top of it. Then when you go back and you listen to, your performance in person, when you go do it on campus, or when you record, like what they're going to were saying earlier, like when you listen to the recording, it's all going to sound a little bit different. So you just want it to be able to add something on top, but if you were to remove it, it doesn't take it away.
Like this is such a difficult question because I feel like every comp like does optimization differently. I know some of our bid comps like allowed us to. I remember we went to Davis 20 this past year, and we had like double and triple optimization or something like that on base, and it was insane. And then like at All American Awards, I think there we had to choose between having either our base and VP there. So each it's on a comp by comp basis, and the one thing as an MD or as a captain is to be able to adjust in those moments because at during comp like you truly never know. So being able to have be flexible is definitely important. But I really agree with what you said, Harry, because we had our double optimization at Davis, and then when we went back and listened to the stage audio, which is all we had for a long time, like it felt like it was kind of distorted, and we weren't getting the true bass sound out because it was kind of focusing on robotifying it to be 2 octaves down. But in person, I mean, according to the judges, they said like the bass came out really well and clear, and that the organization like had like an impact on the output of it. I mean, like we go back and listen to any of these comp audios, there's a huge difference between like the stage audio and like the in-person speaker audio. So that's all. Sometimes that's all we have. We can like adapt with for sure. But just making sure that we are able to adapt in person to whatever circumstances arise. Like I think that's probably the main way.
Okay. Yeah, if there are any other comments on that, again, feel free to jump in. But we'll maybe end our list of questions with this last one. How do you adapt an arrangement when your bass section is either small or maybe inexperienced? If you have a new bass section, something like that.
I'm gonna go out on a limb and say I love a small bass section. I think you can really tailor a bass part to one person when you have it. I think having a group sound is really nice, but when you have one person on a solo mic and you can hear them the whole time, shout out Swap. Like I think that I can now write like a part for him that I really know that he's gonna knock out of the park. And so I think that use that to your advantage. If you have a really big group, split your bass part. Do something that you're maybe not going to expect and take that with sort of how you do all of your bass part. If like you're going to have your bass jumping up and down and doing all sorts of stuff, like that's a really cool way to emphasize having more people versus when you have a smaller group, you can tailor it to them. On the inexperienced side, I think that, you know, find the strengths and then arrangement wise, you can use that to your advantage. Write something maybe simple for your first song and let them kind of take the lead on it, see what they can do. Ask them, like, let your singer be the person who's driving the edits. Whereas if you can give them something challenging, let them come back to you with the feedback and then work on it with them. That is a super great way to like get to a place where then you know how to work with them, they know how to work with you, and you can use it in a really strong way going forward.
Yeah, I'm low-key gonna glaze here for a second, but like I when we let all of our like bases like graduated or left like 2 years ago, and Abhinav was our only bass left. I was we went from having four basses to one bass in 1 year, but knowing that like having observed like Swapnil and Juniper with from the Maka and seeing how much freedom you can have with just a single bass, that like really inspired me to like go above and beyond for like writing bass sections for sure. I definitely am now 100% on the boat of having a smaller bass section. I think like and just turning their mic up and like letting them like really get into it. Like that's definitely where I stand now. But also like I was called back as a tenor at my Swaram audition, and I definitely had a voice like a little flute back in the day, like in comparison to now. And I think letting your basses over time develop into into a true bass singer rather than someone who just like can hit like a G, like over time, like learning how to adapt your voice to that circumstance, allowing yourself to like I had to change like my warm ups up. I had to I like adapt my voice to certain situations and learn how to utilize that part of my voice that I feel like was untapped before, and now like that's a part that I can do. Like I can wake up and sing like a B flat one for one time and then never again. But it happens. Like you just have to let it develop over time. Let your basis practice over time, and it'll like it will increase their range for sure. And not only that, their confidence and their ability to project on lower notes as well. Like before, I could sing an E just fine, but like only on a whisper. And now like the more that you practice being able to project this, the more that it's gonna like interweave better into into the rest of the harmony, and the better that you're gonna be able to achieve dynamic contrast with your basses instead of that just being with the more shouty parts or like with like your altos and tenors that are more uncomfortable in their range.
Yeah, one thing I'll add, this is something that someone brought up earlier, I don't remember, but in like a lower range, like even a small variation in like tuning can really is a lot more noticeable on the lower end than on the higher end. And like full disclosure, this is a problem that Hum had this year with four basses, is that I felt like, with a larger bass section, sometimes it feels more muddy. So I think like having a small bass section of two or even one person that's like a very clear and a very strong like singer on the low end helps like clear, I think, the tone of the whole chord or the whole sound at the time.
Yeah,
Uh,
just to
oh yes, no, you got it, you got it.
Okay. Yeah, from the perspective of singing a solo bass part, I think it gave me also like a lot of freedom to experiment and just like, be with, have like meetings with Rithik and be like, yo, like, can we do this without having to worry about changing it for four other people or three other people? Like, it was just me. And the part was also tailored for just me. So like it was a lot easier to change things, as Rithik had changes, it was only me who had to learn those changes. So yeah.
Yeah, and if I can make a comment on like team composition, like I like to imagine it like a bell curve where I think overall it might be more optimal to have less basses and less sopranos, but then fill up like your majority with these altos and tenors because I feel like they like I said they don't get picked up on the mic as much, and also like you're more likely to like you're not going to get as muddled with those extreme voices as much as they are with them than you are with these middle voices. Like I feel like it's easier to achieve that blend, and like it feels more powerful and full, and you can play with texture a little bit more when you have a little bit more of them. So that's the way I like to think about it for sure.
Okay. With our last few minutes on this call, we'll kind of open it up. If there's anyone listening that has a question you guys want to drop in the chat or come off mute, feel free and we can have our panelists give you a specific answer if you have a question.
I guess I'll break the awkward silence. Um, when you guys have multiple bases, do you end up octavizing multiple of them or just the lowest one, or do you have like a strategy with that?
I think usually that's a comp by comp thing. I would say that we haven't had more than one bass, so I think my strategy with it is they octavize whoever is on your solo bass mic, and usually that is your section leader. So usually I think that that wouldn't be a problem. I'd love to hear more about what you guys think because, if you're having people double or having people, do a split, then theoretically all of that tuning should be in line. Then you just get that little extra bit of octavization down beneath.
Yeah, for sure. We usually like to octavize our person that has like the lowest range or who in the arrangements sings the lowest note. So the last couple of years that's been Abhinav. I know like so when we have like a bass section, you kind of just pick one to be like that's the key octavization person. And sometimes when a comp says like, hey, you have to pick between your primary bass or your VP, I'll usually it's on a comic con basis, like based on whichever like what their audio quality is like as well. But usually I'll lean towards bass just because like as a VP, I feel like I can like increase my volume or reverb or whatever they have. But like I really feel like the impact that bass optimization has can really make something feel not just like acapella.
Yeah, I
Awesome.
think when you have the option, sorry,
No,
I
go
think
ahead.
when you have the option to have, multiple people octavize, I might advise against doing multiple basses who are singing the same line. Just to my earlier point that like on the lower end, especially when you're going even further down in octaves, like I think a small variation can like really muddy the sound. So I might say like if you have the opportunity to do multiple people, do VP and then your point bass or your like solo low bass.
We have a question in the chat here. Do you have any tips or thoughts about arranging for your team when your team's tenor section includes women?
Yes, this is very big for us. This past year, our tenor one section was me and one of our new members, Monsi, and it was really something interesting to try to use what I know about writing a tenor line in combination with the fact that, like we were talking about earlier, not everything on paper works in person. A lot of that comes down to, especially when you're mixing, you know, female singers with male singers, like it gets to be a tone thing and a blend thing, and at a certain point you do need to maybe simplify or have something in a more neutral range. Your alto 2 line and your tenor 1 line are going to have some overlap usually just because of the way that you're writing, but when you have them singing the exact same thing, even when you have both parts just singing the same note, it gets to be a little trickier. So what we leaned towards was when you have the splits, emphasize, a tenor one leaning into an alto tone. But when you have sort of that lower, really, together notes and like you really want there to be good blend, keep it simple so that both of your voices don't have to think really hard about getting really complex rhythms and harmonies out while also having to do blend.
Yeah, this is also something we had to work with this year. I feel like two out of my 4 years we had a female tenor. Shout out Shree and Ashley. This past year, our lovely soloist Shree was our tenor one. And before that, she was an alto, but just because we didn't get like auditions happened, right? We didn't get enough guys, so we moved her down. Uh, it also is like on an individual basis because she did have a lower range than some of the tenors that we had. Um, so like and also she already sings with like a very rich tone already. So like for that, it was easier for her to have like that type of blend with our other tenors as well. So it really is on an individual basis. But I think there's also a lot of times where like she would come to me and be like, "Hey, I can't sing this part," and I'd be like, "Oh yeah, sorry, we wrote them and we thought you were still going to be an alto." So like we would go adjust it accordingly, or we say, "Hey, you can sing the alto two part for this time," but allowing like everybody involved to be adjustable and flexible during that process is definitely helpful. But yeah, I think also allowing them to be able to find what tone works for them in that scenario, what type of like parts in the song are they able to showcase their energy, showcase their belts if possible. Like for a lot of the parts that we rewrote later on the set, I want to make sure that like our tenors could like really belt, and I feel like that really allowed all of them to be able to project in a way that made them feel comfortable, so they weren't like pushing to sing low notes that were might not have been comfortable in their range.
So if there are any other questions, again, feel free to drop them in the chat.
I had a question. So basically, like, what do you guys think about having like if you're limited to one base? You guys talked about that, but like, what if you don't really have a solid option for like a good low base? How do you know how to tackle that? Like maybe um simplifying the parts for them to make it a bit higher, or like how would you go about dealing with that issue?
Uh, I've been watching some ICCA sets from this past year. Remember, I don't know if y'all know the group Pitch Please. They made ICCA finals, and they're an all female team, and they have like a contralto or a bass of their group, and I think they octavized them to. And when you listen to the thing, it sounds like a bass, like it sounds like actual bass. So adjusting the arrangement as a whole to be higher so that everybody feels like they're comfortable in it. I feel like that's probably the approach to go with it, and then playing with octavization just to make sure like the person who is singing like that lowest note there is like still carrying like the root note of the chord or carrying the root of whatever's being presented, right? So I obviously like maybe you're not always going to have optimization as an option, but I think just once again allowing them to be able to be comfortable in their range, I think it's crucial for any voice part for sure.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think range is definitely one of those things that you can work on, but it takes a lot of time and you don't want to have to force that into a comp set. And so it's one of those where lean into where they are comfortable and start building on those skills. I think that that is a big thing of you can use sort of your bass and your lower voices again, like however you want. It's your arrangement. But when you are kind of having those like, technical limitations, it's important to kind of lean into their strengths and then build where you need them to build. And again, like that back and forth of push them enough to where they are growing, but keep them in a place where they can sing comfortably and support the whole sound.
Wait, thank you. I also had like another question. Sorry, this last thing. Um, with that, like going off of that, if you have like one or two bases, probably one base this year, maybe, like I don't know. But if you have like one bass and you have like three tenors or and like three sopranos, three altos, like how do you go about like arranging for that kind of a group without like having the bass be overwhelmed with the sound and like for it to not get lost in the mix with everything else?
I think within like an audio balance, bass is really important, and like we said, it's like an anchor to the point where you don't realize that it's there. So something that we like to do since we had like this year, we had like five, six altos, like four sopranos, four tenors, but then one bass. But throughout our season, we still had like many people saying that they could really hear the bass just because we just turned the volume up. Like we turned the volume up, turn like EQ them so that like we turn up his like optimization, increase like the reverb and just overall bounce them to the point where they don't feel like they're being overwhelmed by everybody else. So that also as a bass, it can be really difficult when you're singing to a mic to hear yourself on stage because like you're a lot of times like it's so low you're just feeling the vibrations. And one thing about stage thing is that you're never gonna be able to hear yourself. So making sure that they can do it as best as possible to kind of hear what they sound like on like the on stage monitors or the audio in the venue itself, it gives them a better chance of being able to not get distracted by the other voice parts.
Yeah, I think the onstage monitor trick is definitely very helpful. One of the things I learned from someone who did barbershop is that people in those groups usually have like one person who no matter what will keep singing whatever pitch they're singing, and then everybody else around them will sort of adjust to them. So one thing that I've learned is like, have your bass or your solo just be that point that is like confident and not changing, and then everybody around them can adapt. So yeah, on stage monitor is a great way to do that. I usually turn up my bass and my solo in the on stage monitor to make sure that they're heard and everybody else can hear them.
Yeah, I think my piece of advice, sort of in a different way, is from a writing standpoint. Like when you're writing your arrangement and you know that you have really strong parts, one, split them. I love to split parts, even if it's not for the whole song. Give them something that contrasts with each other so that they have their own sort of thing that they're doing, and then you have your bass or your low voice or your VP or your solo separately. It gives a really nice contrast and lets sort of you break up some of that big group sound. And not every team is going to do, some people are going to have an arrangement where it's four parts and some are going to have one where it's eight. You're not going to split every single time, but where you can, give them those moments to break apart so that you have a little bit more evenness throughout your team makeup. And then I think it's just the same thing that people were mentioning earlier, that when you have, your bass and your VP and your solo, you can use those three as a very strong piece in the middle. Not everyone has to be singing all the time. You can give your bass a break so that then they can come back in powerful. You can give your middle voices a break so that you can have that highlighted moment where you don't have to push your bass in either turning up their volume or making them sing louder, and they can have that moment outside of sort of just the control of them being able to sing it.
Okay, awesome. I know we're at the hour here. We have a few questions in the chat. Yeah, for our panelists, if you guys want to stick around and answer these, feel free. If you have to drop, also totally fine. I know I saw that there was a question specifically for Abhinav about how do you manage conflict between bass and baritone voices, if you want to take that one.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing being a soul bass is having good breath support, and having like a stable, steady voice. Um, so that's probably the biggest thing. If I'm understanding the question correctly, I think that would be the best way to avoid any tonal conflict or anything like that. Just having a well supported voice. And then the other thing I would say is being the only one on the part. I think there's a little more freedom, and it's hard to get the rest of the ensemble to change around your voice. So it might sometimes, in situations like when you're on stage and actually performing, I would say at least that what's worked best is to adapt to what everybody else, maybe the way everybody else may be singing. So yeah, I hope that answered the question.
Awesome. Okay. And then again, for anyone else that wants to take it, could you speak to your process for creating interesting moving parts without taking attention away from solos?
I'm actually going to do a little bit of combination with this and the next question. I think that a lot of times we use repetition and arrangements to kind of give both our singers and the listener an easier time understanding what's happening. I think that when you're creating moving parts, you want to have it as something that either is going to shine right after a solo or something that's going to have its own spotlight without taking away from a solo. So, for example, if you're singing the first verse of a song or the first chorus of a song and you're introducing sort of a new melodic line, you don't need to add a ton of moving parts. You can kind of use your long tones and your dynamics to carry you there. But as you get later in the song and people are more familiar with it, use that same structure of like, you don't want to copy and paste it over, but take that structure of we have long tones here with swells. Let me do a long tone and then have, a riff in the middle or have something rhythmic in the middle that where we already know what's happening a little bit and you can add on top of it.
This is something that I kind of about the moving parts that I learned a lot. Like when I was in orchestra, I played the viola, so I would never have the melody. I was always in the middle. And I remember there's so many times when like the conductor would be like looking at us where we'd have like a part for like two measures where in between like the part with the violin or the cello had the melody, we'd have like one counter melody that'd come out for like two measures maybe, and like have this like dynamic contrast. And that's something I like to do a lot with like our altos, where in the middle they'll have like an echoey part from the lyrics from the soloist, or they'll have something, or them and the tenors will have something that's like mimicking and harmonizing on top of that. And like we said, like in the moments in the middle where we get to bring those parts out, that will increase the texture. And like as Arjun was saying about like the counter melodies, that plays a huge part. Like that, it's a great way to get like get a this echoiness with the lyrics, while also like thematically contributing to it, while taking a different type of melody from it, while like reversing it and playing with the scale a lot. I feel like that kind of that makes it so texture, makes it rich, and just like Harry was saying, getting to iterate upon a basis that you are setting at the beginning of your arrangement. I feel like that's the key to having like having this texture and these moving parts. Like it's like what we learned like these classical songs where we have like this one like like introduction melody, but then they do variations on it and they get increasingly complicated. That's the same way I look at it. We're like we're repeating it, but we're adding something new to it every single time. Where we're breaking to the beatbox break or like an extra like solo riff or something like that. Getting to iterate on it, like that's how we like get these good parts.
I also think for me,
There we
like
go.
it takes me. Sorry,
No, I was
Andrew.
just literally
I
going to say
think
any
it.
other thoughts on repetition, or we'll just club those questions together, just repetition or making it more interesting.
Sure. I think for me, it takes me listening to the original song like hundreds of times before I'm able to have the creativity to come up with like the counterpoint or like the call and response or like the cool additions that arrangers do that are not in the original song. So my advice is like you have to be able to know the song inside out before you can um add the creative changes. Also with the movement and like the moving parts, I think uh one thing that I do is like I try to if there's a direction I want the arrangement to go, I'll have, I'll use a lot of similar motion. Like even if parts are not singing the same rhythm, I'll have them moving in the same direction pitch wise or uh, sort of, sorry, in the same direction pitch wise while singing the different rhythms, which gives you that texture. I think with repetition also you can just, I think it's a rhythmic thing more than like a harmonic thing.
Awesome. And then we'll just close out with this last one. So, talking specifically about sound engineers, tech time, how do you guys work with sound engineers during your tech time to ensure that you guys sound how you envision your set on stage?
You gotta pray, honestly. I'm playing. But honestly, it really is like on a comp by comp basis, like we say. But for being real, shout out Pramiti and Advait from UW who helped us find which like mics that they use in rehearsal. So we got the Phoenix Pros, highly recommend. They're super expensive, but like they in the long run they really work. I don't know if y'all also practice with mics, but like it really it changes everything. The one thing that when we were making this investment is that we want to make sure that the first time our members are holding a mic, if we have like newbies, if the first time they're holding a mic on stage isn't tech the tech time at the morning of their first competition in January, February. We want to make sure that we have runs where we can figure out how to balance these audios. So we got those mics, and in rehearsal we would do full out runs, full choreo, and everything like that to like our fullest capability, uh, and making sure that we can like see how our balance like plays throughout like that process. I know Abhinav really sat down and like really learned how to do all the like the balancing and all that. I don't know if he wants to speak to it later, but it like learning the ins and out of that really prepared us to be able to like have it like a better shot when speaking with the audio engineers for sure.
I mean, I'm taking notes. I'm about to go search that up right now.
Yeah, we actually
Let me
got
know. We
the
can send it to you.
huh? Oh yeah.
I'm gonna ask you about it after. Don't worry.
Yeah, of course. We got like the full setup, but it's I think having some knowledge and working on it by yourself really sets you up when it comes to comp. So highly recommend if you do have the spare cash for it. So
Yeah, I think the only other thing I'll add is you definitely want, like, your newbies to have mics in their hands before they step on stage, but also telling that your newbies are, but even like your, veteran kind of team members, things sound different from rehearsal to a stage with no one in the audience to a stage with everyone in the audience to a stage where the sound engineer knows you're set. So you have to kind of take all of it with not a grain of salt, but with the understanding that things will improve over time and sort of knowing that the better that you know your part and the set and everyone's part and getting really familiar with everyone's parts. Like I do it because I'm the arranger and I know everyone's part. But I definitely encourage everyone to not learn every other part, but listen to like once you know your part well enough, start to do the listening because that will help you so much more on stage, especially during a tech run, than it will when you're in rehearsal. So building that skill right from the get is a really important way to kind of prevent disaster during your tech run.
Okay, awesome. Well, to end this, thank you guys so much for your time with our panelists. You guys gave awesome answers, awesome insight. Thank you guys for all of your advice and expertise. And so with that, we'll conclude the session on writing through the lower voice lens. Ashwin, Manasi, if you guys have anything else to add, the only thing I have is that we do have two other, I think, team related workshops coming up next week if you guys want to touch on those, or I can as well.
Yeah, I mean, again, thank you all for joining. Next Tuesday and Thursday at 8 EST, we will have a couple more team workshops. We'll post more info on that later this week. But yeah, thank you guys. And we did record the session, so we will upload that on our YouTube channel if you guys want to take a look later. But other than that, I think we're good.
Thank you, ASA.